Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Welcome back to our second day here, our second session today here in the Black Box. This will be a fireside chat with two great minds on the topic of how we can build adult skills to increase productivity in a changing world. As the world continues to evolve through technological advances and economic shifts, it's increasingly important that we as adults are able to acquire and apply new skills. Unfortunately, the gap is growing for essential skills like digital literacy and problem solving. To help us think about this problem and how behavioral science can be applied to drive meaningful change, we have with us two global experts. Andreas Schleicher is the Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. He initiated and oversees the Program for International Student Assessment, among many other things. He has worked for over 20 years with ministers and education leaders around the world to improve quality and equity in education. On the other hand, we have David Halpern, who is the President Emeritus of the Behavioral Insights team, having previously been the team CEO since its inception in 2010. One of the many focuses of David's work is how economies can unlock hidden growth by retraining their adult populations according to the needs of evolving economies. I now welcome to the stage David and Andreas. Thank you so much.
So, lovely to be here. So, the way we're going to do this today is Andreas is going to take us through a few slides. So, just in case everybody isn't aware of his absolutely incredible work, but it'd be good, I think, just he's going to update us on some of the kind of the current work, so lead us off. And then we're going to have just a bit of a discussion about some really interesting phenomena in the world. So, Andreas, over to you to get this off.
Thanks so much, David. I think, we all are used to education that, educates us when we are young and then we're done. And we all know, every one of us, that today the key word is really, upskilling and reskilling. Can you continue to learn? Can you move from this paradigm, you go to school, you go to university, you do your job, you retire, to a paradigm where you focus a lot more on the early years. And I'm going to talk about this later on. We know that the kind of skills that are most predictive for your propensity to learn in adult life are learned in the earliest years of life. They're not cognitive skills, they're social emotional skills. And then, learning and working are now intertwined. We used to learn to do the work, and now learning is the work. You get pretty quickly disconnected from your job if you do not continue to upgrade your skills. Now, easy to say, hard to do. When we actually survey adults, we just did a PISA study for adults. We found that actually 6 out of 10 people in adult life do not continue to learn in any form, neither in university nor on their job. But when you ask them why, you might think, oh, I have no time, I have no money, I have no opportunity. No, the most common answer is, I don't need it. I have learned what I need, I have got my degree. That is the biggest, the mental barrier. No? The economic incentives are strong. Actually, when we measured, the impact that skills in education have on wages, you can see in many countries the effect of what you learn in adult life, the skill effect is larger than the education effect, the degree that you got. Of course, your field of study also matters, how long you've been in your job, and then, some individual characteristics. But think again, the biggest and growing part is your capacity to continue learning. This is the wage effect, but this goes beyond money. You can see, the relationship with being happy with your life is even stronger. Your health, your trust, your volunteering, your sense of political efficacy. Some of those things play out differently in different contexts, different countries, but overall you can see, the unmeasured part, usually, the social outcomes, are even stronger than the economic ones that we usually, talk about. And you can look at this at the aggregate level as well. Now, this is the share of, I'm not talking about young people who do not get the foundations for lifelong learning. We call it, level 2 baseline skills. And you can see that is, in a country like the UAE, still about 40% of young people who struggle with the foundations, and in some countries more. No? Of course, there are also highly skilled people. No? Let's not worry about them for a moment. Let's just focus on those below that baseline. If a country like the UAE would fix that, that would be about, almost 4 times the value of the total economy of the United Arab Emirates. And that's why, lifelong learning, if we get that right, the rewards dwarf any conceivable investment. No. That's a really, really important part. No. The sad part of the story is you do not change those things easily in adult life. If you have not acquired the kind of learning strategies, the attitudes to learning early in life, it's very, very hard to convince yourselves to do this later. So when we looked at that, what predicts learning, you can see, being proactive towards learning is clear. Being able to manage your own kind of behavior. Now, we see when young people are able to manage their learning, they are more likely to become lifelong learners. Now, critical thinking, being able to see the world through different lenses and perspectives, appreciate different ways of thinking, also incredibly important. You only learn when you can see, the novelty in this. Now, cognitive activation, you can see where students engage with learning in itself rather than just accumulating content. You can see they are more likely to have those learning strategies. Now, problem-solving strategies, that's not going to be a surprise. We also saw when at younger ages, age 15, students had those kinds of learning strategies, they were much more likely to know what they want to do in their life, to do in their work. Now, you can see that those kinds of strategies for effectively, managing yourself, managing your learning are also very, very powerful predictors, actually, for how you see the world around you. And last but not least, many people do not learn because they're worried about it. You get a degree, you get a teacher, but if you master those kinds of strategies, you can see people are a lot less worried. You can see actually there's a lot less kind of anxiety among people who master how to learn. Now, people get afraid about learning when they, are confronted with content without those kinds of strategies. Last point I want to make, but it's an important one. When we ask ourselves, what kind of environments foster those kinds of dispositions? Once again, money, you can't make a strong case. The United States spends 10 times per student than Vietnam, and Vietnam gets better outcomes now. So it's not money, it's not time. It has a lot to do with, your learning environments. When you have a teacher who knows who you are, who accompanies you on your journey, who relates to you, when you have that sense, my teacher knows who I am, you can see that's the red bar. You're much more likely to master, actually, the right approaches to learning. The social emotional kind of attributes are very, very important. And last but not least, also on the academic side, you can see, that's also the best good predictor on, academic success. In fact, the best predictor. So designing environments that are not transactional but relational is incredibly important to get people on that lifelong learning, to create that love to learn. Last but not least, parents. You can see actually talking with your children or just eating the main meal with them, whatever. It's almost, it's academic support, social support. You're going to get your kids doing your homework. It's not about telling them to do your homework, but it's about creating that kind of environment. So that's all I wanted to share with you, really. The foundations for learning throughout life are laid very early in life by building the right learning strategy, and that they have huge kind of consequences over the behavior of adults. I say that because we did that survey of adult skills 10 years ago, and we found essentially zero progress over the last decade. Despite, lots of opportunities, we haven't changed the mindset of people now.
Very good. So I know we're focused on adults, but you've introduced also, and Andreas, your work is very famous, of course, on PISA and so on, is you summarize some of it, but if you were trying to kind of almost create a vignette of what it is, say, in many of the Asian schools and systems that perform so well, that create not just high-performing kids, but what look like high-performing adults, what would be the sort of vignette you would say, that's what a good system looks like?
Yeah, on the easy part, what you can do is make learning a lot more granular. Now, I think we are making learning typically very lumpy. You go to university, you have to get a long degree, and that just puts a lot of people off. The more you can give people ownership over what you learn and how you learn and where you learn and when in your life you learn, the more you feel in control of that, the more likely you deploy this and accumulate learning. Those are the kind of easy wins. The harder ones are really, growth mindset. If you believe that your success depends on the intelligence you were born with, why would you study harder? In fact, there's no education system in the OECD area that is successful where students have that fixed mindset. A growth mindset is not a guarantee for success, but a very, very important necessary requirement. And by the way, actually something fairly easy to build. You have interventions, 10, 12 hours, where you can actually build that kind of mindset that you believe, if I try hard, my teacher is going to support me and I'm going to be successful. That's the first thing. Second part is, the focus on learning strategies. And can you think like a mathematician rather than, accumulating lots of, content? I think that's really important. And then the third part, relationships. Once again, where you have teachers, where students, we ask them, students, one simple question, if you come back 3 years from now to your school, do you think your teacher is going to be excited to see you? No. That simple question is hugely predictive of whether students love to learn, engage themselves, do their homework, and almost, and that, in your primary school, probably, the subject that you like most had more to do with the teacher than with that kind of. So again, making learning experiences more relational, less transactional, I think is a huge kind of. You put those things together, and then spending resources wisely. We know very clearly that the quality of a teacher is a lot more important than the size of a class. So spending your resources on that, we know that the volume of time is not predictive for outcomes, the quality, the productivity in the system, and actually it's not rocket science. I do think we have a fairly good understanding of what drives success. It's just hard to put in practice.
And I might as well ask, obviously, in this region, where actually spending a lot of money and resource on education in different ways, are there particular points that you would draw out which would be to emphasize on beyond the general story, where you think there are strengths and also areas to be worked on?
Absolutely. I think the first part is really critical. It's the motivational aspect, to give young people that sense that, what you invest in yourself is going to change your future. Where you do not have that belief set, learning becomes just a consumption activity, and it's not a very attractive one. So people will just not engage in this. And I actually think, you can create it, but I think in this region it's hard because, when you are poor, it's your only route to success. When you're rich, you can see other kind of opportunities. So I think that's very hard. I once wrote a paper, why oil and pizza do not mix. Looking at that, actually, you can see, resource-rich economies have a harder time building those kinds of motivational foundations. But the other part, is really the quality of people in the system, the teachers. Now, I think the system has very much put its emphasis on quantity. Making the career of the people working in the system, the teachers, the school leaders, not just financially attractive, but intellectually attractive. So that you actually get people interested in working with young people. And I think then you have almost got it.
By the way, for those who don't know, the growth mindset work is absolutely fascinating. I mean, anyone who's a parent is going to read it and think, oh my goodness, have I done the right thing? It's absolutely fascinating. And the work that's evolved since it, like the way in which a teacher should give feedback to say, I'm going to give you a hard time on this because I believe in you, how important that is. And I do want to ask you about something else, which not everybody in the room may or may not have heard of it. There's a thing in psychology for the last 100 years practically now, which was called the Flynn effect. And for pretty much 70 years, on every single measure for both kids and absolutely adults, we saw increased performance in their cognitive performance across many countries and regions. And it's a big effect. It's about 2 to 4 percentage points on an IQ scale. So if you say go back to your predecessors 70, 80 years ago, it's like 98%. The average person is better than 98%. Like, it's a big effect. Like, what a great, amazing thing, the Flynn effect. Because that's the good news. The bad news is because it's about 15 years ago, roughly, the Flynn effect seemed to stop. And if anything, in the last decade, it's been going down. So I wonder if you might want to, we look like we're getting more stupid, Andreas. What's happening?
You know, nobody knows the exact answer to that. I don't think you can say we get more stupid because we do not see that on all dimensions.
In my words, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used it.
So, you know, for example, numeracy is something where we have not seen the Flynn effect improvements, but we've seen flatlining performance in my adults. Where we see the big drop, and it's not just, you know, dropping, it's dropping like this. Sort of in the last 3-4 years, it's more extreme than in the 12 years before. The answer, the only hypothesis, I think, is there is simply the way we interact with technology. Technology has strengthened consumptive information processing and actually weakened creative ones. You know, if you ask yourself, you know, how did you read newspapers 10 years, 20 years ago? You actually engaged with, you know, complex material. You looked at different viewpoints and opinions. You contrast, you can treat. Today, you read snippets of information that come to you prefabricated, and so our reflective capacity is deteriorating in the same way, you know, Google Maps has made us lose our sense of orientation. And I do think that it's an hypothesis, but if you look at the fact that this is happening everywhere in the world where technology is used, is, I think, quite plausible hypothesis. We see that, you know, not just among older people, I mean adults, we see that in young people, equally pronounced. I think it's a real worry. We think that technology is something that super empowers us, but it can also disempower us in really important ways. No?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's an absolutely terrifying graph and sequence which merits much more attention than it's getting amongst policymakers. We'll come back to that in a minute about AI. Of course, there's a lot of discussion on AI at BX this time. Can we talk a bit more about interventions, particularly with adults? So it's less rehearsed. I mean, I'll just tell you as an intervention, which I think you'll know about. A number of years ago, we were asked by a business department to improve math skills in adults. And they were frustrated because they were funding these programs and workers weren't taking them up. Anyway, we tried all kinds of things to get people, these workers, to go and do a maths program. And the good news was, yeah, we increased it by sort of 500%. But it was because it was like 1 in 1,000 people, and we managed to get 500. It was insanely terrible. No adults wanted to go and learn maths. So what do we do about this, and particularly against this sort of background?
Yeah, you know, the first is to realize that as we get older, we learn differently. And what we often try to do is we mimic school. We try to put people back into school. And particularly for low-skilled people, school may not have been a great experience. So they just, you know, put off by the kind of environment. That's the first thing. I think we need to sort of create more environments that are much more closely integrated into your work. You know, I really believe great places of work are great places of learning these days. That's really the combination that gets you. It's not putting you in a math class, but making your work a lot more related to cognitive and social emotional development, sort of integrating the world of work, integrating with the world of learning. I mean, it's actually interesting, you know, for people in the UAE, vocational education is the last resort, not the first choice, but actually vocational education is much better in that because people work on real problems. They work with real people. They make mistakes that have real consequences when they learn. And I think that's something that you need to bring to adults because as an adult, you know that you spend time and energy and you want to see something for that. So I think creating environment. Second part is creating rewards. You know, again, if you tell yourself you need to do a master's degree or a PhD before, you know, your employer will notice it, forget it. You know, you need to get much more granular. Sweden and Canada are countries that actually are quite good at that. They actually give people, you know, small increments will lead to, you know, likely investments and then actually also better salaries at the job. So I think those are it's very, very hard for governments to create, you know, adult learning kind of environments. You really need to bring the learning to the adult rather than push the learner into a kind of school type.
And again, are there particular countries, I mean, again, we're familiar particularly with PISA and so on, but for adults, where you would point to countries which are doing a particularly good job in terms of building and maintaining adult skills across the lifespan, which you've talked about?
Yeah, if you look to North America, Canada would be the top performer on that. In Europe, it's Sweden, it's Denmark, Norway. They have a long tradition of lifelong, life-wide learning. Also, what they do well is, you know, you look at countries, I mean, UK, US, most adult learning would be very specific for, you know, you learn some tips and tricks for your current job. That's not actually moving you further. What you want to engage is in learning for your next job, something that extends your vision. And that's something that countries like Denmark, Sweden do really well. They have people are willing to invest in their future. Employers are willing to invest in the future of their employees, and you can see the result it has now.
No, ask actually in the room, how many people? Shock! I'm going to ask you guys something. In the last year, have you actually really had to scratch your head and learn a new skill? Gone on a course or? Okay, and who hasn't? Go on, who's going to be honest? Who yeah, well, congratulations being honest. Yeah, no, that's incredibly interesting. So one of the things, again, it's all around is the AI discussions. And, if we were worried that the way we're consuming some forms of media, you can see it in intentional spans, how long is the average clip that people have watched, and now it's down to, a fraction of what it was a decade ago. But AI appears to offer this potential prospect of, is it going to be an amazing tool to make us sharper, better? Or actually, is it going to make us the equivalent of mental Wallies, from the movie, which is, I just tell you, sorry, some of you may know Sendhil Mullainathan, who's worked on behavioural and also machine learning, and he has his favourite slide to capture everything you want to know about behavioural science is that slide of a fitness centre. Have you seen it? With a fitness centre, and it's got steps in front, and it's got escalators, and everybody's on the escalator going up to it, right? And it's kind of funny and whatever, but it's also sort of telling you a solution is that we get people in the gym by, literally an escalator to get them there, but otherwise. But what's the mental equivalent of that? And for Sendhil, he talks about, he's gone back to the Steve Jobs account about, AI, Steve was talking about computing, was be the bicycle for the mind, right? So it might be the bicycle for the mind. Is that a good thing? Or actually, given human behavior, it's like, yeah, we'll have bicycle. No, can I have an electric bicycle for the mind, please, which does all the cycling for me, right? So I don't know what's your view on it. Maybe it's too early, but are you optimistic, worried, or?
If you make it a bicycle, I'm optimistic. If it's a wheelchair, probably not. No, and I think this is not so clear. I think AI is not a magic power. It's an incredible accelerator and an amazing amplifier. It's going to amplify good behavior in the same way it accelerates poor kind of learning behavior. And I think, and we see both sides of it. If you are dyslexic, AI is amazing. Suddenly you have access to the same kind of information that someone with advanced reading skills has. So I think there are amazing possibilities. I also think the way it can extend our knowledge, the way it can sort of make us bridge time and space. I think all of that is real, but we also see very clearly that it atrophies some of our very human capabilities. And at the OECD, actually, we are not only looking at how AI advances against cognitive skills, we are also looking at how AI advances its capabilities on social emotional skills. And that actually is even steeper. AI is figuring out much faster how humans are than how the nature around us is. So I actually think that is where I think the biggest risk are, because we will likely see that in the same way that the industrial age made us second-class robots. It actually we adapted to the machines. That's how our schooling come from.
Yeah.
And that is what we could see is on the cognitive and social emotional aspect, that actually, we will be, substituting, not complementing AI capability. So I think, but it is really something, and I would actually argue that if you build strong foundations among people, that's where the positive powers will come. If you believe that AI can make up for what you did not learn, I think good luck. I think that's where I would really worry.
But it's at least sobering. I mean, you think how many, not just kids, but adults in India and elsewhere all learn to do their coding. And it's like, well, wait a minute, ChatGPT is pretty good at that now, so sorry about that. So what are the kind of adaptations you see in the best, but again, adult or youth educational systems in the world responding to this new technology?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for all of us is to just, evolve and to grow beyond our limits. I think in the past, you could see the world in front of you, linear, and you could just slowly evolve. Today, I think your capacity to imagine, to build, to adapt, I think is stretched by the, pace of change. Actually, we have some really interesting data about the UAE is something where kids here are doing better than kids in Europe. Why? Because they live in a world where tomorrow is different than today. Whereas in Europe, we have ancient history and people who... So I actually think this is a strength of the country here, where that emotional capability to accept that tomorrow is different from today and to grow into that. Now, Chinese are very, very good at that as well. So but I think that is critically important. So I think tomorrow's employer, the first thing they're going to look at, your willingness and ability to learn, to grow beyond yourself, to actually, question. This world no longer rewards us for learning answers. It rewards us for asking the right questions. And I think that those kinds of capabilities, they will remain with us. I think the second part is the social and emotional. Can you work with people who are different from you? Can you relate to people? Can you appreciate different ways of thinking, walking? I think will remain with us. And then last but not least, and this is, people dismiss disciplinary knowledge. Oh yeah, we no longer need to learn science and coding and so on. And I agree with the coding, but you need to have computational thinking. You need to understand the ideas and concepts underpinning the disciplines. And we tend to throw that out together with the content. And I think that's a mistake we must not make. If you can think like a philosopher, if you can think like a mathematician, if you can think like a scientist, you're going to be able to learn. If you have not mastered those foundations, you will not be able to use AI as well.
So just to check, I think that's a positive, certainly sounds positive. There's a paper which some of you may have read, has attracted a lot of attention. So now around what's called gradual disempowerment, and it's to do with really labour market and skills, right? Which is that the presumption, you follow those lines as you say. If if you get ChatGPT to do the various components of PISA or the other adult skills, it's doing pretty well now. So why wouldn't you just lose comparative advantage in every single domain, and then do we just shrug our shoulders? But you sound optimistic, right? Still,
throughout history, humans have always won that race with technology, and that makes me optimistic. Is that a guarantee for the future? No, it's absolutely not. It could be different this time, but we have many times in history had that sense. This time is different, and at the end, humans were able to develop new things, new capabilities that technology had not, and that's my hope. If we do not, if we just adapt, I think there is a shrinking space for us in many areas. No? But that was true for the industrial workers in the Industrial Revolution. So I think that is a human capability, and that's perhaps, that the biggest differentiator between AI and humans is that consciousness. You have that possibility to reflect and to reinvent yourself. AI cannot do that. AI works from a knowledge model to predict something. And, we should, my answer to this is we should strengthen that capability rather than, the consumptive behavior of people when it comes to knowledge. And I'm really worried about it. I'm a scientist by background. It often breaks my heart when I see, how we teach science like religion in school. We make people believe in some scientific theory, we give them lots of exercises to practice, and at the end we get no result. That is what we have to get rid of now.
Let me ask you just in the last couple of minutes, one last thing you and I have talked a bit about, which is that in medicine, there are now lots of institutions which kind of support this mutual learning. Education seems to be on the beginner slopes of it. We mentioned at the What Works sort of session earlier, moves to create a kind of global infrastructure where we can learn better from each other. Across the world, we spend more than $2 trillion, I think, on education, let alone adult skills and labor. What would you hope the future might look like in 5 years' time to sort of accelerate the learning of learning systems, if I can call it that?
Yeah, for me, that is in the past, education was a very local, inward-looking business. You could solve problems in a local environment. Today, in this AI world, it will only survive if it becomes a global enterprise. If the knowledge that you develop is accessible to the knowledge that I have and the knowledge anyone in this world have. And this is something that we have achieved in science and in medicine. And in education, there are still many barriers. We don't have the infrastructure for that. And that's a problem that I think is very, very easy to solve. That wouldn't take a lot of, it would just change the mindset among policymakers that actually it's a good thing for me to know what other people do, rather than saying, you're different from me and therefore I can't learn. That's often still what we have. But that's an easy problem to solve. The harder problem really is to develop the kind of nomenclature to make sure that the knowledge gets, and also here to change the mindset of people. There are too many people in education who still think this is more of an art than of a science. Whereas our data show, I can tell you 70% of the performance variation of schools in the world or in the 100 countries for which we have data is predicted by a fairly limited set of variables. So actually, we should treat education not less of an art, but more of a science, and then become better to mobilize and share and jointly use that knowledge.
Well, if anyone in the room has a spare $50 or $100 million, I really would recommend spending it on building this. The equivalent of what's called the Cochrane, for medicine and education, it would make an incredible difference. Hey, Andreas, you have long been you've been a hero of mine. I think the work you've done has been absolutely astonishing. I think that the best work that OECD does, period, is what you do. And so thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you. And by the way, it's not $100 billion. I actually think even if we had 10% of that, we could make good stuff.
He's already negotiating, folks. There you go. Thank you, Andreas.
Good. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our speakers, David, Andreas, truly for a fascinating and informative discussion. I think it's crucial that we work together as individuals, as families, as societies, as businesses and governments, and really look into the systems and the tools that we have in order to overcome this gap in essential skills and equip each other well to enhance productivity when the world is going through such rapid change. Thank you again both, truly, for this session.